Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps you build and sustain a better creative business. Today on the show, we have Maurice Cherry. I met Maurice at Podcast Movement in February. I was literally just sitting at one of the tables. He was sitting at one of the tables doing work, and we struck up a conversation, and I was just fascinated by his story. He is a creative strategist at glitch.com. He's also the host of Revision Path, an award-winning weekly showcase of Black designers, developers, and digital creators from all over the world. Revision Path was the first podcast ever chosen by the Smithsonian for inclusion in their collection. So I wanted to have Maurice on the show to talk about branding, building a podcast, maintaining a podcast for 7 years, and a whole lot more. Before we get into the show, I want to remind you that we have a collection of resources over at thecompletecreative.com to help you build and sustain a creative business. The most relevant to this show is our free business course. It's a 10-day email-only course, which shows you all of the most important steps to build a rock-solid foundation for your creative career. And you can get it by going to thecompletecreative.com/FBC. Or you could head on over to thecompletecreative.com and check out any of our old podcasts, archives, our blog posts, or any of our free courses. And don't forget to rate and subscribe to make sure that you get these shows every single week. All right, that being said, let's get on with the show. Take it away, Maurice. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
Right now, I am passionate about getting out there and talking to the design community. I have a podcast called Revision Path where I talk to Black designers, developers, and creatives from all over the world. We've been doing it now for 7 years, and this feels like the first year where we're really starting to actually get out there and talk to people in real time. So we just wrapped up doing a live show in Los Angeles. We've got a few other cities that are interested in having the show come there. New York, Chicago, Kansas City, Seattle, Houston. So the rest of the year is kind of looking up in terms of getting out there and being able to talk to people and sort of spread the message about the show and about the work that we're doing.
That's incredible that you say that. Like it's that it feels like it's coming together after 7 years, because you were also one of the first show that the Smithsonian ever picked up as a podcast to include in their collection. So for someone to say that who's had such success previously, it's kind of gratifying to hear that you still have new heights to achieve, even if you've had such success as you have.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I think that's the case because with what we talk about, and really, I think not just what we talk about, but who we talk to, sometimes it ends up just getting overlooked by other bigger podcasts that may focus on, say, comedy or pop culture or the news, et cetera. I mean, we're talking about design. We're talking about it, from Black people that are all over the world. And so it may not have the same sort of podcast popularity as bigger shows in terms of getting out there in the community. But I think the fact that, one, like you said, it's in the Smithsonian is great. But two, the fact that it's been able to sustain itself for this long, to be able to have such an ardent community to pull from, to do these sorts of live shows is really something.
What do you think what do you attribute the longevity of the show to?
Ooh. Wow. I would say probably just my rampant curiosity for the most part. I am always excited to talk to people for the show, even 300 plus episodes in. Like, it doesn't get old for me at all. The fact that I'm able to talk to people about their craft, about the work that they do, to learn about their inspirations, and really to give them a platform to let other people know that this is what they do, that inspires me to keep it going. I mean, for most of the folks whom I've had on the show, this has been probably their first interview of their professional career where someone has actually talked to them about the work that they do, and not for a job, but just to let people know, like, hey, I'm a creative, this is what I do, or I'm a developer, this is what I do. To be able to have that platform for them to do that is really what keeps me going.
Well, I really connect with that, because that's sort of the basis of this show, where we're talking with creative types about how they built and sustain their careers. And about half of the time, it's someone that has been on a bunch of interviews before, and about half the time, it's someone who has literally never done an interview. And the experience of interviewing those two different kinds of people is quite different. With the person who you are interviewing with for the first time, their first interview, I find you have to make them more comfortable. It takes a little bit longer for you to get in the groove, but they tend to be raw when you get into the interview. Whereas with the person who's been interviewed a whole bunch of times, it's sort of breaking them down so they don't give those same answers that they've given at 100 interviews before.
Yeah, that's true. And I encounter that with my show as well, but I think I found a pretty good way to make new people feel very comfortable. And then for people who have done this, dozens to hundreds of times perhaps, to make them feel at ease that this isn't just like another podcast or another interview they might have done.
And what do you do to make that happen?
Now, see, that would be telling trade secrets. Well, I guess for new people, honestly, I just talk to them a few minutes before about like how their day is going. I thank them for coming on the show. We just kind of just have a little chit chat beforehand. Oftentimes I can tell in someone's voice if they're nervous. And so if we've recorded for a few minutes and I can sense the nervousness, like I can hear the gears turning as they give responses, I'll stop the show and we'll just talk some more to get them more comfortable, until we get to a point where we can then start recording. Sometimes we'll record multiple times if that happens. It's rare that does happen, that we have to do it that many times. And oftentimes when that happens, it's more for technical difficulties than guest difficulties. But I don't have a problem with re-recording interviews if it makes the guest more comfortable. And I would say for those who have done this just dozens of times, I kind of try to bust their chops a little bit, not to the point where I'm being insulting or anything, but I will ask questions that sort of break them out of the same types of questions that everyone asks. Because, I mean, to be honest, I don't find that many people to be great interviewers, just based on podcasts that I've listened to and things of that nature. So I try to ask questions that I know are going to cause them to pause and think about something that maybe they haven't had to consider or that no one has ever asked them.
Yeah, I think if you can get someone after you ask a question to pause and you can hear them say, "Oh shit, I don't have an answer for that," in their brain, that's like my favorite moment of a show.
Yeah.
So what you've been doing this for a long time. I took a 2-year break between me going away, my first 150 shows and my last 20 shows. So I'm interested, as someone who's had kind of an unbroken chain for 7 years, what has changed during that time?
What's changed in terms of the guests or just
in terms of you doing the show? How has the show evolved from episode 1 to episode 300? I think I saw was like 334 right now.
Yeah. The biggest thing that's changed, I think, is the technology. Like the tech has just changed now, where people have better, more affordable microphones. It's interesting because these are microphones which have kind of always existed, but I think now that people know about them, they're available in more places. They can get them at an Amazon or a Best Buy, and they may not have to go to like Guitar Center or some specialized store to get the gear that they might need. So the audio has definitely gotten better. In terms of me, I think I've gotten better at just getting to the truth in terms of when I'm talking to someone. Like I said, if it's their first time, making them comfortable. If it's someone who's been on this, who's done several interviews, it's about sort of breaking them out of that comfort zone a little bit. I've gotten pretty good at getting to the truth of an interview or the truth of what someone is talking about. And oftentimes that just comes as the conversation happens. It's not something that I feel can be taught. It's like a reflex. Once you're in the dance of a conversation, you're then able to kind of know, I should sort of go this way, or I should go that way, or I should interject in this part, to know sort of what you can do to get more out of the guest that they may not be giving you initially.
Yeah, I was listening to your last interview, and I actually heard the when it happened, when you guys were talking about NASA, suddenly like the conversation changed and it became a lot more personal and conversational once you were able to sort of break through that first 10-minute block. Not that it wasn't good in the first 10 minutes, but once you were able to sort of make that NASA connection, you took the interview to another level.
Yeah. And it's something that it just comes along as the interview is going. You're like, okay, I can say something here. I can, really drive the conversation this way. So I'm almost like producing the interview as it happens when I do that.
No, I definitely feel that. And it sounds like me and you have a pretty similar way that we go about interviews. I want to move back, though, for a second. And I get you to tell us a story. I want you to tell me the story of you getting that email that Smithsonian wanted to include your podcast in their collection. I want us to know like how it felt and how and what you were feeling around that time.
Sure. So the thing about the Smithsonian acquisition is that actually was 4 years in the making. So it's something that I had been actively sort of working on since 2015. In 2015, I attended a conference at Harvard University called Black in Design. And at that time, I met one of the curators for the Smithsonian, who was mostly working on the new National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I told her about the show and what I was working on, and she seemed like she was very interested, but also I was sort of just in the first 2 years of the show. We were just coming up to, I think, episode 100. And so she's like, okay, this is great. Here's my card, we'll talk. And it wasn't until 2 years later at the next installment of the conference in 2017, I saw her again. By this time, the museum had opened to great fanfare, hundreds of thousands of visitors, et cetera. So now the museum was a known entity within the Smithsonian, sort of group of museums. And so I met her again, told her about the show. She was like, I remember. She gave me her card again. And I told her, at this time we're like coming up on episode 200. And here are some of the people that we've talked to. We've talked to folks in the Obama White House, et cetera. And she's like, okay. So now I think at that point, it sort of clicked and people knew, okay, this is something that maybe we should be paying attention to. And so in 2018, they sent me an email saying that they wanted me to send basically a list of all the episodes I had to date so they could look over them and sort of decide which ones they wanted to use from the collection of episodes to have in the Smithsonian. So I sent them a spreadsheet full of all the names and URLs. They got back to me, said, we want these 10. And so when that happens, what they basically have to do is obtain something they call museum use rights. So they would have to contact each of the guests that I've had, talk to them about what they're trying to do, get their approval, et cetera. And that took, I would imagine that probably took the rest of the year because they finally got back to me in 2019, last year, to let me know that, these are the episodes that we want to have. They basically sent, I had been in conversation with them in email back and forth about what was going on, telling them that I'm coming up on episode 300, et cetera. And they sent in the mail a deed of gift that basically says, these are the episodes. If you sign this and get it back to us, that means this will be in the Smithsonian. And so it was coming up on our 300th episode, and I had the guest for the 300th episode already booked. I was going to be talking to Hannah Beekler, who's the Academy Award-winning production director, most notably for Black Panther, but she's done a lot of Ryan Coogler's films as well. So I wanted to kind of sneak that one in. And so I asked them, do they have room for one more? So instead of 10 episodes, could they take 11? And they were all for it. And I thought they would be all for it because the summer prior to that, I had actually went to go visit the Museum of African American History and Culture and saw how much Black Panther stuff was like in the gift shop and everything. And so I'm thinking, oh yeah, they'll take it. I just have to find a way to massage it in, I guess. And they did, which was great. I'm glad for that. They actually used 2 Black Panther episodes that we recorded. So the one with Hannah, and then we did a roundtable episode, me and 3 other designers, about the art and design of Black Panther. And we managed to release it, I think the week after it aired, I believe we released that episode. So while there was a lot of podcast talk that was reviewing the movie, we were probably the only podcast that actually reviewed the art and the design of what all was going on in the movie. And so they amended the deed of gift, sent me a new one. I signed it. They countersigned it, sent a copy back to me. And I was like, this is great. At the time, we were using a PR firm called, I think they were called McMartin Daniels was the PR firm. We were using a PR firm because we wanted to get the word out about the 300th episode. But then the Smithsonian stuff happened right along that same time. And so we had to work with their Department of Internal Affairs to ensure that we were making the correct claim that this was the first podcast in the Smithsonian. Now, it is attributed to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, but the Smithsonian is a group of like 19 museums. So if it's in the Smithsonian, it's technically in all of them. It may not be a freestanding exhibition, but it's in there. It's part of the archives. And so we wanted to make sure that claim was true before we started just going and telling people about it. Because the one thing we didn't want to do is to say that, and then someone's like, oh, well, actually, no. But no, they confirmed that it was the first podcast. And once that happened, we, wrote a press release, put it out on the wire. A couple of places picked it up, Fast Company, MSN, among others. And the word got out that this was the first podcast that was part of the Smithsonian. And that's pretty much how it happened. It was a long process. I'm not going to say that I was working continually over those 4 years. There were certainly some breaks, but the fact that I was able to consistently keep the podcast going, consistently letting them know that the podcast was still around and just keep their interest up, I think is what's really sort of made this all happen.
That's the part that I pulled out from this part. Not that I'm happy that it took so long, but I'm happy that it took so long with regards to this interview, because it shows that you met somebody 5 years ago, you got in their ear, then you met them again, and then you talked to them for 2 years. And the success is never point A to point B. And it took you going, it took a long path, and it took you finding this person and being in a place with them at a convention, and then seeing them again and showing that you had stick-to-itiveness and that you were still you were still going strong. And then it took you still being around 2 years later for this to all mature. And so often, we're told that the path to success, there's just some silver bullet. And it's nice to hear. It's always nice to hear every time I hear it, even though I know that it's not a silver bullet or it's not going to happen overnight, that these things take time and energy, and there's a lot of failure points along the way.
Yeah. And I mean, also, it's just about really sticking to it, because this wasn't something, the main goal of the show was not to get into the Smithsonian. The fact that did happen, don't get me wrong, that's great and that's wonderful. But the fact that I was still keeping the show going, still maintaining my audience, getting a new audience, getting guests, getting sponsors, all of this, just sort of factors into it being really a marathon and not a sprint. Like, if the show would have gotten in the Smithsonian after its first episode, that would have been great. Although I don't think it would have. But, keeping it going and keeping that consistency is really key. And it shows people that it's something that's not just I think, honestly, after I got past the 5-year mark, it was less of a show and more of like a platform. And so because it's been around that long, because it sort of came out of that first, I guess, really second golden age of podcasting with Serial, et cetera, and is still around now, and is still has a vibrant community and is still pulling great numbers and is still doing well, like that's a testament really to the medium itself.
Absolutely. I mean, well, I was in we were both at Podcast Movement, and that's where we met. And I went to one of the talks, and they said that in 1 year, from 2018 to 2019, went from 550,000 to 850,000 podcasts that were around, which is a huge number. So to be able to still maintain interest in a show when there's so much more competition in there says a whole lot about the quality that you're bringing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to move a little bit and talk about you mentioned something in your last answer, which talked about, you said the show moved from just being a show to a platform, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, the design industry, I mean, for what it's worth, is pretty white. It's pretty male, pretty old. Well, I guess when you're talking about digital design, not so much, but in the grand scheme of things, diversity in this industry has always been sort of a hot button issue. To that end, even though there are several different design media out there, there's design organizations, et cetera, despite all of that being out there, what's shown and what's represented as the design community, or even as a designer, is still a certain type of person. And that person is usually a white person, usually a white male. And so Revision Path, when I say that it's sort of grown from being a podcast to a platform, the thing is, because it's been around as long as it has, and because we've talked to as many people as we've talked to, we've sort of built up, in a way, this roster of designers and developers that are doing this, and people turn to Revision Path to see that, or they turn to Revision Path to hear those stories. Like, yes, it's a show, but it's also a platform because these are people that are talking about the work that they're doing. They're talking about the companies that they work at or the companies that they have themselves. And it's the only design media platform that's doing it on such a consistent basis about Black people. And so it's ended up becoming that because over the years, these other design media have not really changed or diversified in any sort of way to make Revision Path obsolete or outdated. And so it's grown into being that platform simply because of this sort of, huge absence in coverage that the community still sort of perpetuates.
Yeah, and you actually use that you have job boards on your site now, right? Or I don't know, you may have always had them, but when I was listening to your show, your last episode, it talked about that you have job boards there as well, on top of just the other sponsors that you have.
Right. So we started doing the job board about, I think about 2 years ago. Because what happened is from doing this, companies now look to Revision Path to say, oh, well, where are Black designers? Well, here they are. Here's a whole podcast talking to them. Here's dozens of them that we can go through and sort of find out more about and learn about their story and the work that they do. I mean, people have been hired from the show. They've gotten opportunities from just being on the show, which is great. So companies are looking to Revision Path now as that platform to say, hey, if we want to reach this audience, we need to be talking to Revision Path. And several companies will send, they'll send messages and emails like, oh, we're hiring. Can you let your audience know? Can you let your people know that this is something that's going on? Well, they don't say people, but you know what I mean. They want to let the audience know that they've got jobs and things like that. And for me, I saw that as a revenue source because I'm like, that's advertising. That would be the same way if a sponsor came to you and said, hey, we have this great product. Can you let your audience know about it? Well, it's going to cost you to do that. So we opened up the job board as a way to, one, be able to fulfill all these requests that were coming in, and two, as a source of revenue, because now we are able to expose more people to these positions. The jobs now have sort of a funnel that they can go into if they say, we want to find designers of color, we want to find Black designers, we should be posting on Revision Path. So the job boards kind of really helped out in that way.
Well, and I know that a lot of podcasts, the thing that I heard was how to monetize the podcast. That's how you that's what you see in every sort of Facebook group or in all of these talks. That's what people are always talking about. And it's a great sort of interesting a way to monetize without just talking about advertising or talking about doing courses. It's another revenue stream that you've found by using the niche market that you've been able to curate over all these years.
Yeah, and even for sponsors that we have on the show, I try to practice a concept that I call radial adjacency to make sure that the sponsors that we choose are ones that are going to be best for the audience and not just anyone that has a check. So granted, you'll hear some podcasts and it may sometimes sound like the sponsors don't really mix with the show. These are mostly, I find, podcasts that are with larger networks. They'll have an ad agency or something that will sort of broker the ads between the advertiser and the show. So, of course, you're going to hear about Blue Apron or HelloFresh or Casper, Squarespace, Stamps.com, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes that may not mesh with the show. Like if it's a true crime show and then it breaks and then all of a sudden you're hearing about HelloFresh, like what does a meal kit box have to do with a true crime podcast? I mean, yeah, people have to eat, but does that make sense for the audience? Does it make sense to have that, or do you just care about the money? Most people just care about the money, so it's not a big deal. I use this concept that I call radial adjacency to only reach out to companies and to only accept offers from companies who I think will work best for the audience. So, for example, designers are using online tools for design. They tend to have higher incomes. They're most likely living in larger metropolitan areas. So I want to hear from web hosting companies, web domain companies, stock photo companies, because these are, the assets that we use in order to create the artifacts of, design or whatever. If someone like, Harry Shave Club came along, I probably wouldn't take it because it doesn't really make sense to advertise razors to my audience. To me, it doesn't make sense. I want to make sure that the audience is getting something from it. And also to make sure that it's actually really even just a good fit. Yeah, we could have ads for Harry Shave Club, but would it really be a good fit? Maybe, maybe not. But a web hosting company would be a great fit because designers need web space. So yeah. It just makes more sense for me to try to find those right companies to work with or sponsors, et cetera, that I think are going to work best with the audience and not just which ones are willing, to pay to get in front of the audience.
Tim Ferriss talks about this a lot with his show. He says that the reason that he's able to charge a premium for his show is because he curates his advertising so much that the people that actually that are listening to the show, they have a very high click-through rate, or I don't know what it's called when you actually do that from a podcast and just go. But he curates it so well that it actually allows him to charge a much higher CPM than most other podcasts because he's making sure that there's radial adjacency, as you put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it just makes more sense. Again, even if I'm reaching out to sponsors, I feel like I'm going to have a greater time getting through to sponsors that have something my audience would use as opposed to just whatever sponsor is cutting a check.
Right, exactly. Because at the end of the day, the sponsor's really trying to get an ROI back from what they're paying you.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take you to get before you started getting that word of mouth or that scale for the show? Do you remember?
Oh, goodness. Maybe about a year, I think. MailChimp was our very first sponsor. Shout out to MailChimp. They're in Atlanta, Georgia, just like I am. And I had already worked with them for years back when I had my creative studio. So I was already familiar with the people who worked there. I knew that they were getting a lot of attention for the advertising they were doing through Serial. And so I just figured I would try just to kind of put it out there. I also know that MailChimp is a company that really supports the creative community. They're always sponsoring events. They're sponsoring design talks, etc. So it just sort of made sense for me to reach out to them to say, hey, we're doing this podcast and this is what it's about. And it's right here in Atlanta. Would you be interested? And they were, and they've been a great sponsor, pretty much ever since then. So that was the first year that happened. I think the first time we got our biggest sponsor, which is Facebook, was in 2016. And even then, that was something that took like about a year and a half to cultivate. Yeah, that took a long time. That wasn't as simple as, because Facebook is massive, the fact that Facebook was sponsoring a podcast in 2016, kind of sounds a little bit weird almost, because podcasting wasn't that big back then, at least not for brands. It wasn't that big. And for them to sponsor this, small show, they're like, oh, this kind of doesn't make sense. But I curated that connection through working with them, through talking with people who work there, through finding out what it is that they really need and how Revision Path can be the solution to that. And so it really made sense in that respect that they would sponsor Revision Path, because we're helping them out with their goals just by existing, And it's so funny because when that happened, there were several other podcasters, some of which are well known, whom I will not name, that were in my inbox saying, introduce me to your ad rep over at Facebook. It's not that simple. One, I'm not going to do that, because that's the relationship that I've made. That's taken a year and a half. And two, there's no guarantee if I did do that they would even sponsor your show. Like, you may come with better numbers or something, but that's not what Facebook is interested in. At least that's not what they're interested in with my show. They're more so trying to reach this audience. It's less about how many downloads you've gotten or how long you've been in new and noteworthy. Like, they don't care about that.
Was there a download number that you hit, or a episode number that you hit, that you started to feel like it was okay to reach out to sponsors, or feeling confident to reach out to sponsors? Or did you just say, screw it, I'm doing it now?
I just said, screw it, I'm doing it now. And I'll tell you why. Because when I first started the show in 2013, there were other design podcasts that were around, mostly just all white men talking to each other or talking to other white men about design. So I was already, kind of an outlier in this field. I did a lot of outreach to other design podcasts to talk to them about, the possibility of doing maybe guest swaps, or if there's ways that I could help out with what they're doing or something like that. Many of them either never responded, or when they did respond, it was negatively, it was harshly, it was in a way that made me feel like, oh, well, there's no real community here. At least it didn't feel that way to me, because a lot of it was very racial in terms of the terms they would use and what they would say back and stuff like that. And so once I really saw that I'm not going to get the support that I need from the design podcasting community, I need to just run my own race, that's sort of when I just said, well, let me just start reaching out to people. Because the thing is, I still have a studio to run. I'm still doing cold calls to clients and things like that. So I might as well use those skills to try to reach out to companies and see if this will work. Outside of the company, I knew the accomplishments I had didn't make me, just some regular guy off the street. So hopefully by having this podcast as an opener to at least start the conversation for sponsorship and to let them know the audience that they would reach, it could only really be a good thing. Now, granted, there were people that said no. We certainly had people that said no, but a lot more people said yes than I thought. A lot of companies that we've worked with in terms of sponsors, we worked with Creative Market, with Hover, Facebook, MailChimp, Google, SiteGround. We've been very fortunate to be able to work with these companies, for years and years, honestly, to be able to connect them with our audience. And I don't think that would have happened if I was still trying to sort of, I don't want to say get along with my fellow design podcasters, but if I wasn't trying to, I guess, link with them, if that makes any sense. It just ended up feeling better for me to just go my own way and just forge my own path and worry about the audience that I have instead of the audience I'm trying to get. So once I focused on that, like, what's the most value I can offer to the audience that's tuning in every week, that's downloading, that's writing me? How can I give back more to them? And so doing that also empowered me to be able to, talk to them and get survey information so I can put a kit together so I can start reaching out to companies, because I feel like the worst they can say is no, or they don't respond at all. But many of them said yes. And so I'm very grateful for that.
And it must have also helped you curate the show in the future, too, by being able to reach out to them. I'm an author, and I deal with a lot of authors, and I always tell them, deal with the people that are reading your book, not the people who aren't reading your book, and try to find more of them. And when people sort of can hone in on the person that is listening, hardcore listening, or hardcore reading their books, suddenly they're able to put out better content that's better suited for those people, find better guests, and just curate an experience that those people will love and will allow more of them to show up and know that they're in the right place when they do.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, I'll be honest, like, it's worked. Well, I wouldn't say it's worked, but it's been a double-edged sword. Now, there are sometimes people will not want to come on the show because it's had this many guests, or because I've had these sponsors, because they feel like they aren't at the level yet where they should be on a show like that, which I find to be very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. But I know that a lot of times people psych themselves up. I was just talking about this on another interview that I recorded, where I will go to a show and I'll give my email out to people, telling them to email me if they have questions. And just because, like, I'm a pretty well-known person in a specific scene, they think, oh, well, I can't, like, I know he said to email him, but he doesn't actually mean it because he's way too busy. And I'm like, I am not way too busy. I'm actually telling you to do the thing. And I'm happy for when you actually, like, reach out. But yeah, I think a lot of times people get in their own way.
Yeah, I know that feeling all too well. One thing that I try to do for conferences, like, I'll try to reach out to people within 48 hours after I get their card, just to let them know that for two reasons. One, I don't keep business cards. If I email you, your email is now in my email that I basically live and die by my email client. So, like, if I've emailed you, then there's a good chance that I'll be able to recall that if I need to. But two, it lets them know that I'm not just out here, just some random person. Like, let's find a way to connect, because there's people that I've connected with at conferences, et cetera, that we may not have found a way to work together directly, like, right away. But a few years down the line, an opportunity might come along and I'm like, oh, I know this person who does this. Or if I'm looking for guests for a show, maybe not for my show, but for other shows that I've produced, then I can refer the person that I knew from this conference for that opportunity or something like that. So, yeah, I know what you mean. Absolutely.
And there's someone I met a couple of years ago said it was talking about your monkey brain, and you've only got like 150 contacts you can keep in one time. And I find that if I interview someone within 48 hours of me getting home from a show, I've still, like, locked it. I'm still in their monkey brain, and I can, like, and then they will remember, as opposed to if even 2 weeks later, they're not going to remember that interaction.
Yeah. I try to keep all of that, just so between my email client and Notion, which is this sort of new, I don't know what the best way to call it is. It's sort of like Evernote or something on steroids, but between those two, like, that's my digital brain. Anything that I need to recall is probably in one of those two spaces, so it doesn't have to sit in my head. I just tend to have good recall, especially with my show. I tend to have pretty good recall. So if I'm meeting someone at a conference or something like that, I'll email them. So then, okay, your email is now in my email system. So if I need to reach you again, I can do so. Like, I'm not going through stacks of cards to try to find whomever. I just don't do that, because if I do that, then I know I won't remember. But at least my email client remembers, or Notion remembers that I've taken notes on this, or I've talked to this person, or something like that.
Absolutely. And I think once you get back from something like that, a convention, you're most amped to do something. You're most ready to do a change or to look for other opportunities when you've gone a couple of weeks without you're kind of settled back into your old life. So when someone emails you, and this happens to me, someone will email me like months later and I'm like, oh my God, I did tell them to email me, but I meant like soon, like because I'm excited now, and a year later I'm not going to be excited.
Yeah, someone did that to me recently. It was oh God, I think it was a Lyft driver. So I don't know if this happens to you, but I'll tell people, like if I'm writing in Lyft or something, and they ask me what I do, and I tell them I either do a podcast, or in the past I told them I've had my studio. I'll usually give them my card if I have cards on me, but then they'll contact me like 6 to 8 months later, like, hey, remember me? Do you know how many Lyft rides I've taken in the past 6 to 8 months? I don't remember. Like, you gotta give me something here so I can remember you, which is why I will usually try to go ahead and email people as soon as I can, especially after an event or something, because the half-life on remembering that stuff is extremely short. And especially with me juggling my podcast and a full-time job and other projects that I'm working on, like, I'm not saying I don't have good recall. I do have pretty good recall, but like it ain't that great where I'm going to remember, oh yeah, the random Lyft driver from 6 months ago who I gave my card to. I don't even remember what your first name was. Not to be dismissive, but like I wouldn't remember.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I want to talk about, because we just got back from this conference, right? And one thing that I learned from this conference was I don't actually know anything about podcasting that I thought I knew about podcasting. And one of the things I was going for was to try and figure out if scaling a book was a lot like scaling a podcast. If there's a lot of similarities to that. I've scaled a lot of books. I've had a lot of successful books. I've helped a lot of authors build their platforms. But I was not sure if podcasting was somewhat alike, very much alike, or not alike at all. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about your best lessons that you've learned in like getting the scaling a podcast up, so I can make some notes and see if it's actually sort of similar to the stuff that I've been doing in my career.
Okay. The best way, I guess, of scaling a podcast up, I mean, as early as you can afford it, get help as early as you possibly can, whether it's an editor, whether it's someone who can write show notes for you, someone that can handle more of the technical things. As early as you can possibly afford it, go ahead and hire someone because, go ahead and hire someone because it's just much easier to scale once you've got that additional help, because as one person, you can only do so much. There's only so much you can do. Like, I think I got when did we hire RJ? RJ is who is my editor, RJ Basilio, who is great. I think I've been using RJ since 2015, perhaps. And we took a year off in 2019 because the show was part of a media network. And then we got off that media network, and we've since hired RJ back. But I would not have been able to keep this same weekly momentum going without him at all. The fact that I can record the episode, send it to him, and then he can send me back the finished version is great. That takes so much off of my plate that I don't have to do. I don't have to sit and listen back through the interview and edit it and everything. That's what I'm paying him for, and it's great. So as soon as you can, hire the staff that you need to take those sorts of tasks off of you. So that's the first thing. The second thing for scaling is build a system, but build a system that works for you. Everybody's system doesn't work for everybody. For me, for example, I mentioned, again, this tool called Notion because I love them. My entire show is in Notion. I actually showed this whole workflow to someone at I showed this workflow to someone at Podcast Movement, and they were blown away. Like, everything that you need for my show is in Notion, on an app, on my phone, right at my fingertips. And I mean everything. If I need to look at past guests, if I need to look at a question bank, if I need to pull a logo, if I need to get my sponsorship kit, all of that stuff is just a few taps away. in Notion. Now, it took me a little while to set it all up, but now that it's all set up, it's right there for me to have as soon as I need it. We also have a production schedule between my social media person, Robert, and my editor, RJ. We have a weekly production schedule because, one, I don't want anybody to work weekends, so we just do Monday through Friday. But with the production schedule, I'll say, okay, bet, Monday, publish new episode, first wave of social media updates go out. Tuesday, we begin production on next week's episode. I'll record the intro, outro, job posting stuff, send it to my editor. I try to record at least a month in advance. So RJ has already got maybe 4 or 5 episodes just in the can, just waiting for me. All I have to do is send him the updated intro and outro, and he can get started on it. Wednesday, we do a second wave of published episodes. I'll write show notes and get episode pages and stuff together in my audio host and everything. Thursday, I prep social media updates for next week and send them to my social media guy. He gets that going. Friday, I get the episode back from RJ. I request the transcript, get the transcript, pull everything together to schedule, and we're done. And that's pretty much it. So Monday through Friday, we've got that schedule. At this point, it's down pat. And so even if I'm like out for a week or something like that, I can scale it up if I need to do it for 2 weeks or something like that. But I know on this day, I have to do this. And on this day, I should be expecting this. And so to have that system in play to be able to do that is also what helps me to sort of keep the show going and scale it as I need to. Because what happens is, even if you have new people, you can slot them right into the system where you need them to go. And so that way it makes it a lot simpler to scale as you need to. Because then if, just in the event you would need to have a new person or something like that happens, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time getting them up to speed. You let them know, okay, on this day you do this, on this day you do this, and that's it. So those 2 things have really, really, really helped me out with scaling, is getting those things together. Everything that I need for the show, I can pull it up in Notion when I need to. I've got my production schedule together, and, I have a team that can help me out, which is really great. And granted, we have the team because we have sponsors that allow us to have that. So that's why I say, as soon as you can afford it, do it. I'm not saying that it's a necessity to have to scale a show, but it really helps. The sooner you can make that happen, it will change the cadence of how you get your show out.
Yeah, I did my first 150 shows before I burned out editing everything myself. And when I came back, I said, there ain't no way I can do that again. Like, I will for sure burn out if I don't hire an editor. So one of the first things I did was find an editor for the show. And at least all I have to do when this episode is done is I already have the intro and outro pretty much recorded, unless there was some like crazy thing that happened in this episode. And I just send it off to the editor, and then it comes back. And it is such a huge relief to not have to do that part.
Yeah, it just takes my mind off it, because now that I'm doing my episode recording after work, I have to shift gears, at 350 from 359 to 401. I have to shift gears from work Maurice to revision path Maurice. And so I have to get into this other mindset to start doing interviews, as soon as I can right after work, because that's when I'm able to record. So everyone in the system kind of plays their part. Like, I'm not just sitting and twiddling my thumbs, on the days where it doesn't seem like anything is going on. I'm still actively working on parts of the show.
Right, exactly. So we are reaching the end of our hour, unbelievably. But I want to talk about a little bit about branding, because I know your job at Glitch is in-house creative, and you talk in your LinkedIn thing about branding. So I'd love for us to end talking about branding, probably, and how it relates to Revision Path, and then we'll talk specifically about Revision Path, because I do want to make sure that we talk all about that show, which I have enjoyed listening to for the past week.
Okay, sure, absolutely.
So you mention in your LinkedIn bio that you do a lot of sort of brand stories and linking brand identities across the entire brand. And I would love for you to discuss why it's important to have a brand identity for like any project that you're launching, and what that means to specifically Revision Path when you're thinking about your brand identity.
So I think having a brand identity is really important because it's for two reasons. One, I think it makes it real in your mind that this is now an entity and not just this kind of swirling eddy of ideas. And two, it makes it real for other people. Like people, particularly here in the United States, but I would, wager probably in any developed country, are inundated with brands all the time. From the time that we are children to now, brands are something that humans instinctively flock to or away from for any given reason because of our overexposure to them. So I feel like it's important to have a brand for whatever your concept is, your podcast, your video series, whatever, because that's what people relate to. We relate to brands. Advertising has turned us, into these people that are very highly susceptible to these sorts of things. And so, what is a brand? A brand is essentially a promise or a feeling that's made between the customer and the company. Now, how you choose to do that varies a lot. Like there was one session that we sat in at Podcast Movement. I don't know if you were in this one, but this was near the end of the day on Friday from Manscaped. Do you remember? I don't know if you were in that one.
No, I wasn't in that one.
So it kind of took me a little bit by surprise because I wasn't expecting that. But like Manscaped is it is a tool for, manscaping. And so the presentation is not, I don't want to say is not professional, but the presentation was talking about, bush and balls and pubes and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, I was not expecting that. Now, granted, they did give information about how they do their branding and things like that. But there are people that latched onto that. Like they had a room full of people that were dialed into that specific thing because that's the promise that they made to those people. Like, hey, if you come for Manscaped, this is what you're going to get. So having that together, even if it's not something that I may 100%, understand or get with, other people do. And that's who they're trying to reach. So that's what's important to them. I just find it's really important because, especially for audio, I mean, podcasting is such an intimate medium. Unless you're doing something where you're recording in person, you may often be doing it alone or doing it remotely with other people. You might not really know how it's doing until you honestly get external validation for it. Like you see numbers in your audio host or you get reviews from people or people email you. That's how you kind of have a benchmark to know that you're doing well. And so having a brand just makes that easier for people to latch onto, to be able to say, okay, this is something that I identify with. This is something that I like, and this is something that I want other people to know about.
Yeah, I heard once that it was something that having a brand is like a magnet, and a magnet attracts the right people and repels the wrong people really quickly. And the stronger your magnet is, and the stronger your brand is, the more easily it will magnetize the right people to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk about your brand, Revision Path, now. I know we talked a little bit at the beginning, but I always like to come back to it at the end because you've just given all of this great value, and it's a great time for everyone to sort of learn more about you. So could you talk about Revision Path and what the show is and what its mission is, maybe?
Sure. So Revision Path is an award-winning weekly showcase of the world's Black graphic designers, web designers, digital designers, developers, really just digital creatives. And like I've said before, it's from people all over the world. You're not going to necessarily find these people on any other podcast, but I guarantee you that the stories that you hear will be relatable when it comes to, imposter syndrome, career success, breaking out of a small town, convincing your parents that this is what you do for a living and that it's not a hobby, things of that nature. We try to make sure that it is relatable to people. I'd say our average audience is probably like between like 18 and 30 perhaps. So like students to young professionals, but we do have a lot of people outside of those ranges that do listen, particularly in the upper range. It's really a show for creativity. If you are interested in hearing stories from creative individuals, if you're interested in learning more about a specific type of design, if you're even interested in just learning about who this person is because you saw their picture and thought, oh, this looks like an interesting person, I want to know more about them. Like, this is really the show for you. We come out every Monday, usually between 7 and 10 a.m. I try to get it out in the morning so it can be people's source of inspiration for the week. We've got over 330 something episodes. As you said earlier, we're coming up on episode 335. We've talked to people on every continent except Antarctica and South America. I hope to get some people on South America this year. So it's just a great show. I mean, I'm biased because I host the show, clearly, but the conversations that you get on this show, you're not going to hear anywhere else. They're humorous. They are, full of passion. It's just like two friends that are talking. I really try to make sure that the interviews are very conversational, that it's just like two people talking over like a drinks or something like that. I don't want them to be these kind of strict question answer type of shows. So, if any of that interests you, if you like podcasts like that, if you like hearing conversations and interviews, definitely come and check us out. revisionpath.com.
I mean, I certainly hope that the people that are listening to this show would like that show, because it's almost a 1-to-1 overlap of like the kind of stuff that I talk about. You said all the right things, hopefully, to this audience. The thing that I'm super jealous of is all of the pictures that you have are so beautiful of all of the guests. Like, I don't know does someone go out and take pictures of these people, or all these people just happen to have these wonderful black and white photos?
Most people just happen to have good photos. That's something I am very well. One thing when so even like when we're booking people on the show, I try to set up the booking process so the last thing that they have to do is the interview. So once they talk to me and they're finished, like, it's a wrap. All they have to do is just sit back and wait until they hear from me to say that it's live. So even in our booking process, we require a high resolution photo. We want their bio, their Skype name. We want to know what stuff they want to talk about, what stuff they don't want to talk about, what do they want people to take away from the interview, like that sort of thing, to kind of help shape the environment of the conversation. And then we just go from there. But yeah, most people tend to have great photos. I'm very fortunate for that. I mean, I think we can honestly thank mobile phones for that, because we have so many cameras now that have such great resolution, or can take, photos with, 20 megapixels or what have you. Like, we've got great photos now because I think of more mobile phones.
Yeah, I was looking through your site and I just kept being like, fudge, I gotta step up my photo game here, because the comics people and the book people that I talk to do not have nearly the level of high quality photos that you have. Maybe I'm going to take that and make them give me a high quality photo now. Maybe that's the secret. So as we end our time here, last thing. Most people that are listening to this show are probably at their drafting table or writing their book or driving to work. So I always like to give one last opportunity to get people to pay attention for the next 2 minutes while you impart the best piece of advice that you could give to aspiring creators. It could be something you said already, something that you haven't said yet. Tell us where we can find you, and then we'll say goodbye.
All right. The best piece of advice that I can give is that you need to define success on your own terms. Certainly in an industry like, we'll say for podcasting, so much of what is deemed as success is coming from people that are already successful in some way. That could be monetarily, that could be the number of downloads, or the reach that they have through their social profile, etc. That may work for them. That may not work for you. What you have to determine, I think, as a creative, as a podcaster, what have you, is what does success look like for me? At the end of the day, if you really think in an ideal, perfect world, what can you be happy and content with at the end of the day when you drift off to sleep? Like, finding out what that level of success is for you is going to be what makes you successful, not external validation from other people. I mean, all that shit is great. Like, don't get me wrong. For me, I'll use myself as an example. Being in the Smithsonian, great. 300 plus episodes, great. Being in the game now for 7+ years, great. Is that my definition of success? Not really. My definition of success through the show is being able to reach people, being able to change the design culture, to let people know that these are folks who are out here that are doing the work and that we are worthy of being celebrated and talked about just like everyone else. Like, to me, that's what my definition of success is. So I think for creatives, if they're looking at other people and they might have some form of imposter syndrome or something like that, really sit and think about what success means to you at the end of the day. What are the benchmarks that you're going to be the most happiest with at the end of the day? And so in terms of where people can find me personally, I'm at mauricecherry.com. It's just MauriceCherry.com. I'm also on Twitter at Maurice Cherry. You can find Revision Path at revisionpath.com. And it's also at Revision Path on Twitter as well as on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
So that was Maurice Cherry, host of Revision Path and a creative strategist at glitch.com. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to find Maurice online and let him know. Check out his show. I think you'll enjoy it. I know I do. And don't forget, you can get our free business course. It's a 10-day email course to show you exactly how to build a rock-solid foundation for your creative business over at thecompletecreative.com/FBC. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you download this podcast. That's it for me. I'll talk to you next time.